welcome back to yet another episode of Storytime with Mr. Bates. I hope everyone's doing well out there. Today's episode is a top 5. We've done a couple of these before on this channel, but this time we'll be taking a look at an ancient culture that we haven't really touched on yet, that being the Persians. Persia, for those that don't know, were rivals to a lot of other ancient cultures we tend to study in depth here in the West, cultures like ancient Greece and ancient Egypt. At their height, the Persian Empire controlled land in the modern countries of Iran, Egypt, Iraq, Libya, Armenia, Lebanon, Azerbaijan, Israel, and Georgia, the country not the US state. They are known for their cultural feats, such as the founding of Zoroastrianism, which is credited as one of, if not the first monotheistic religion, establishing fair and just laws for the time, and for some of the earliest examples of abolitionists, as we see in the example of Cyrus the Great. However, they were also pretty skilled inventors, and are responsible for ancient forms of a lot of things we use today. Now, this list is not in any particular order, except for the number 1 spot. The number 1 spot I gave to the one that I liked the most, but the other 4 spots I just sort of compiled the list as I was going, just because. Anyway, with that stated, let's get to it. Now, let me be clear. Perfumes have been around for thousands of years. The Persians were not the first people to use them. They didn't discover them, but they did make them better. In fact, some say that Persian rulers were so interested in making themselves smell better that they invested heavily in the study and creation of perfumes, leading Persia to dominate the perfume market. It was so important that we can often find depictions of Persian emperors holding perfume dispensers or cups in their hands. But what exactly did they invent? Well, before the Persians, perfumes were largely oil-based. You would take this concoction of oil and flowers, wood sap, ash, other things that they thought smelled good. They'd mix in with the oil, and then you would rub it on your skin. Now, the problem with that type of perfume, or incense, or whatever you want to call it, is that it leaves behind like an oily residue on your skin. If you've ever put on really slick sunscreen, or the sunscreen bug spray combinations, and you know what I'm talking about, that sort of greasy, slimy residue on your skin, that's what their perfume did. Well, obviously people didn't like that. You don't want to walk around all day feeling like you just took an oil bath. I mean, it worked to make you smell good, but you don't want to feel gross. Well, Avicenna, or Avicenna, I'm not entirely certain on how it's pronounced, a Persian doctor who experimented constantly with scents, actually figured out a way to use alcohol instead of oil. Alcohol evaporates easily, and it leaves the scent behind, but you don't walk around all day feeling wet. This discovery changed the way perfume was made, and alcohol was used for decades after, centuries after. In fact, there are some perfume companies today that use alcohol-based perfumes, even in the modern era. So this discovery in ancient Persia is a pretty big deal, and it changed the way people smelled, I guess you could say. All right, now for this one, I want to be clear. Irrigation, much like perfumery, was not necessarily a Persian invention, but they did innovate. Much like they did with perfume, they took the idea of other cultures and they improved upon it. They changed it in such a major way and made it far more effective. Instead of carving long open channels off of rivers, which could dry up or flood depending on the season, as you know, old irrigation techniques, they would dig these sort of canals off of flowing rivers, big rivers, and they basically make a little small one coming off of it to lead to their farm. I mean, it's an effective way to do it, I guess, but the problem is it's open to contaminants. It could dry up relatively easily, or in flooding seasons, then your irrigation canal could also flood and damage the land on either side. And if you dug it and you're going along someone else's property and your irrigation canal floods, on their property, well, now you got to pay them for the damages. Well, the Persians created what were called qanats, or underground tunnels that kept the water flowing from water sources uphill down to the farms. With this, farms are getting pretty clean water in a much more reliable way, coming straight from a source like a well or a spring. Now, I don't want to undersell this. These ancient Persians would hand carve these tunnels. They're literally carving them out by hand using stone or metal tools. I shouldn't say stone, they're using metal tools. Sorry, after calculating and planning out where these canals are going to go. Now, even a slight miscalculation could cause a lot of problems. If you go too far deep, then the canal's not going to come out the way it's supposed to. You risk flooding or damage. You don't want that. So these calculations had to be precise, and for the most part, they were. However, once they were done, the farmers wouldn't have to constantly check their irrigation canals for damage or flooding and could instead focus on their crops. Now, if you ask me, that's a pretty impressive feat. You don't have to constantly go out and check to make sure that your canal's not damaged, it's not, being exposed, there's not a dead animal floating around in it or something like that. Instead, you can focus on what you're supposed to focus on as a farmer: your crops, your farm. Now, Persians didn't speak English. That comes much, much later. So they didn't exactly invent the word paradise itself, but they created the example many think of when they hear the word paradise. Even in the heart of their dry desert climate, the Persians found a way to make the most beautiful gardens of their time, and honestly, some of them, the descriptions of them sound better than things we have today. Through a combination of botanical science and their advanced irrigation techniques, like the qanats, they created lush gardens teeming with all sorts of vegetation that wouldn't have a chance growing in the region without their work. In fact, Cyrus the Great was said to spend as much time as possible in his gardens and would only leave them when he absolutely had to rule. But when he had any downtime, he's immediately back in those gardens, which, I can't blame him. These gardens were called pairi-daeza, which is where we get the English word paradise. You can probably see how that works. Now imagine this. You live in the desert. You just see sand and dirt, and it's hot, you don't like it. And then all of a sudden you come across a town with this lush garden growing in the center of it. Or you come to the king's palace, and he's got all these different gardens all around his palace. That would be an impressive feat even today. But back then, come on. Now, this is one that you probably really enjoy in the modern day, but let's remember that we're talking about ancient Persia here, so it's a pretty significant one, and honestly, really brilliant. When building their homes or public buildings, Persians would use mud brick, among other ancient construction materials, which weren't all that great for staying cool in hot climates. Basically, the mud brick would trap in whatever's inside. So if it's cool inside, then it's great. But if you're, on the ground, at ground level, and you use mud brick, it's going to trap the heat in. If you've ever been in a school or a house where the AC's broken in the middle of the summer, you know what I'm talking about. That sort of stagnant, just the heat is just sitting there. You can't really do anything about it. He would get trapped in the building, and even with windows, there was little hope of cooling off on some days. That is, until the invention of the wind catcher. This little stroke of genius was a series of ventilation shafts with a scoop-shaped vent on the roof that would pull in cool breezes high above the ground and blow the hot air out as it moved through the building. While it couldn't lower the temperature like our modern AC units can, it's not going to drop a 90-degree day down to a 70-degree day. It was a pretty effective way of keeping the inside cooler than the outside, especially in a hot desert. You got to do what you can when you're living in the desert to stay cool. Obviously, they're not going to have the same impact as a Freon AC unit or something like that, but take what you can get. Okay. Now, I picked this one for the number one spot because I have a very strong fondness for refrigeration. Sitting down and drinking a chilled bev is truly a gift, especially on a hot day. You know, you spend the day outside, maybe doing chores, mowing the lawn, pulling the weeds, or you just have a day out and about, coming home, sitting on the couch with the air conditioner running, having a chilled beverage, or even on your front porch or your back porch or something like that is something close to heaven, just in my opinion. That would not be possible without refrigeration. Now, as it turns out, it seems that the ancient Persians might have liked to keep things cool as well. And they had a way to keep things cool in desert heat. These were called yakchals. They were spiral-shaped chambers of vents dug into the ground, implementing smaller versions of the wind catchers, which we talked about previously, to bring a constant circulation of cool air into the chamber. If you've ever hung out in a basement for any extended period of time, you know that being underground cools things off significantly. Adding in that the wind catcher system only helps to cool things off further, and you end up with an incredibly useful tool to preserve food in hot summer months. Again, being in the dry, hot desert, you got to do what you can to keep things cool. This is a pretty ingenious way of doing it, if you ask me. And that's our list. I hope you enjoyed learning about the advances made by ancient Persia. I knew about a few of these beforehand, but once again, just like when we talked about the wrestling, the wrestling Mongol princess, I found myself learning something new while researching this episode, and that's something I always enjoy. I hope you find time to enjoy a chilled bev of your own sometime soon, maybe while relaxing and watching one of my videos. Now, let's take a look at the question of the day. Which of these inventions do you think is the most impressive or surprising? As always, leave your comments below, or I guess to the side, or wherever they've moved them at this point. I don't know. And I'll see you in the next episode. Please remember to like the video if you've enjoyed it, and subscribe for more weird, interesting, or strange history stories every Wednesday. We're very close to 100 subscribers. If we can get there, I plan to start doing videos on ancient myths as well. So please share this video with anyone else you think might enjoy it. As always, have a great rest of your day, you lovely, lovely people. Bye.